all presenters to please mute themselves until they're ready to present.
Okay.
Start in just a moment. Thank you. Okay, great. I'm sure we've got quite a few people on so far. I'm sure we'll have quite a few more people who will be logging on shortly. Can I just ask a few of our listeners to write in the chat box to make sure that you can hear me okay? Is the sound coming through all right? Great. That's excellent. Excellent to hear. Technology will be our friend today. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. We are incredibly happy to welcome you to the webinar today. As you know, we'll be talking about women in research in the developing world. We'll be talking about challenges and opportunities. This is actually the first webinar on this topic of women researchers that we have run at INASP. Judging from the outstanding response to this webinar, and we have had quite an outstanding response, I think we realize there's quite an appetite to talk about this issue, and hopefully this won't be the end of the discussion, and after this webinar today, we'll start some conversations and there'll be some good ideas for how we can move forward. So just before we start, I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Chapman. I'm the Program Manager for Research and Communication and Author Aid at INASP. I currently work with 10 partner institutions in 4 countries towards building capacity in research communication. And as part of this process, I've also started to coordinate a stream of work focused on supporting women researchers, which I'll talk about more in a moment. So the aim of today's webinar is to provide a short overview of the topic, and I'm hoping we'll gain some very interesting insights into these issues from our panel of speakers. As hopefully you've seen, we have an excellent panel of speakers today. So our first speaker is Dr. Jo Beale, Director of Education Society for the British Council. She'll talk about gender in academia and research, and she'll look at some of the international trends. She'll be followed by Professor Fleur Fabian from the University of Dodoma in Tanzania, who will speak about challenges for women academics in Tanzania and share lessons learned from their gender mainstreaming process that they've recently started. We'll then hear from Saro Almankoshan from the Somali Institute for Development, Research and Analysis, and she'll speak about gender equalities in research and higher education in Somalia. Lastly, we should have hopefully a good amount of time for questions and answers for our panel of speakers and just general discussion. So please do feel free to engage and interact with our speakers by asking questions throughout the webinar. If you want to ask a question, we'd like to ask you to please write it in the chat box at the bottom left-hand side. You can write a message. We will be monitoring the chat box throughout the webinar, and what we will do is compile all the questions and go through them in the Q&A session at the end. So can I just ask that if you have a question for a specific speaker, you can please note that clearly in your message. And also, just to note that this webinar is being recorded, and we will share the recording with everyone afterwards. We will share links to any of the documents that we described today in a follow-up email. So before I introduce our first presenter, I'm going to spend a few minutes just quickly talking about why we decided to run this webinar today, and also give a quick overview of INASP in case you haven't heard of us before. So INASP is an international development charity. We're based in the UK, and we work with a global network of partners in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The work that we do supports individuals and institutions to produce, share, and use research and knowledge, and we focus on supporting researchers, librarians, and policymakers in these ways. The Author Aid program specifically supports early career researchers to communicate and publish their research. Author Aid, we've noticed over the past few years when we've run some of these workshops that men tend to outnumber women 2 to 1. So in 2015, we started to address this for the first time by working with the University of Dodoma and Professor Fleur Fabian, who will be speaking shortly. And since then, we've expanded some of the work at INASP on the issue of women researchers. So why are we focusing on women researchers? Dr. Beal will give some more information about this shortly, but just briefly, we know that only 20% of the world's researchers are women. So the issue is particularly stark in Eastern and Southern Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Only Southeastern Asia has achieved parity in engineering and technology, but globally, women's participation is lowest in engineering and technology at 17%. In 55 countries, men outnumber women researchers by more than 2 to 1. And we also know that papers with women listed in key authorship positions receive fewer citations than those authored by men. In December last year, we held a small roundtable with a group of 10 women researchers in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. So they represented a range of women. They were senior lecturers, field researchers, and professors at universities and research institutes. And we wanted to talk to them about some of the firsthand issues that they had experienced. So some of the things they told us, you'll see here on this slide, but also they said that the challenges start at home. So household activities are women's activities, and the expectations are that they will look after all of their children's needs. Some said that their male supervisors were biased against them and felt that they weren't suitable for doing field research. For example, one woman we spoke to who was leading a research team in Tanzania was unable to communicate with local villages because of their beliefs about interacting with women. And that obviously had an adverse effect on her conducting her research. Many said that they had to work twice as hard to be recognized for achieving the same results as men. And others talked about the loneliness, being the only woman amongst men. They said that access to a female mentor, so someone who's been there before, would be really invaluable in dealing with this, but it's very rare. So this generally really shows some of the larger issues that we've heard. It's very similar to what we've heard from some of our other partners. And we know that women are often constrained by family expectations of either roles as wives, mothers, and carers. And these roles do interrupt and limit their education. There are sometimes policies and practices within institutions that might be biased against women or don't take their needs fully into account. They can often experience insecurity and harassment doing their work or within their institution. And they do face additional obstacles in completing their field research, like I spoke about. With a lack of senior role models who can mentor and support them, these challenges also often lead to what is called the leaky pipeline. I know not everyone likes this term, but this is the best term we seem to have at the minute. And this really talks about the fact that more women tend to drop out of their academic careers earlier than men. And this is something as well that we've seen and is very common and also in Europe and North America. So I mentioned earlier that at INASP we have started to address some of these issues. We recently launched the Gender Mainstreaming in Higher Education Toolkit, which you can see here. It is essentially a 5-day workshop program, and it addresses some of the issues that affect inequality within higher education or equally within research institutes. What the workshop does is act as an initial sensitization and awareness exercise, but the end result of the workshop is ideally an action plan for that institution and how they can address some of these inequalities. So far, we're piloting it at 2 of our partner institutions, so one in Ghana and one in Tanzania. And we will aim to share some of the learning from this process through our blog on the INASP and AuthorAid websites later this year. We are also developing some other areas of work to complement this, so looking more widely at gender gaps at the institutional and leadership levels. And you can see at the bottom on the left-hand side is the URL, so if you're interested in reading the toolkit in full, it's fully available on our website. Now, without further delay, I'm very happy to introduce and welcome our first speaker. So Dr. Jo Beal is the Executive Director of Education and Society for the British Council. She has previously been Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Academic and International for the University of Cape Town and Professor of Development Studies, directing the Development Studies Institute at the London School of Economics. She is a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences and continues to publish, and she is also currently chair of INASP's Board of Trustees. So she is going to review some of the issues in higher education and research and place these issues into context by looking at the international trends. So, Jo, welcome. And just to note that you'll have to just unmute yourself. Perfect. Welcome, Jo.
Thank you. And can I just say how pleased I am to be here and to share some thoughts with you. This is an issue that is incredibly close to my heart. Just to put my experience into some perspective, I had my family very early and started my higher education late and did it part-time. I then took quite a long time working up the career ladder, if you like, getting into the research side of higher education quite late in life, and then moving into university leadership. I can see things from both the UK end, having spent nearly 20 years at the London School of Economics, but also from through the lens of what it's like being in a university in the Global South as a result of my experience from University of Cape Town. So I bring a lot of personal passion to this topic, but also as a result of my role in British Council, have a bird's eye view on some of the issues. So that's where I'm coming from. I want to kick off by saying something about the trends. And if you look at the demand for tertiary education globally, it is on the rise, and rapidly so. So the graph you see shows demand in India and China, outstripping that in the US, but also an increase in some of the emerging markets like Brazil and Indonesia. And the interesting fact is that if you take the global aggregate, women participate in tertiary education more than men. So that busts the myth that the pipeline isn't great enough to see women succeed in higher education. The pipeline is full of women. If you look at, I'll just give you some example countries. So in Argentina, 98% of girls go into tertiary education, just around 50% for men. In Sri Lanka, 1.6 of women to every one man. Bahrain, 2 women to every one man, and in Kuwait, 41% of women go into tertiary education compared to 18% of men. So it's not that women aren't going in, and even in countries like those in the Middle East, where sometimes female participation in tertiary education is difficult, you're still seeing a lot of women going into higher education. So they're coming through the system, but they're not succeeding in it necessarily. Now, in some contexts, we know that sociocultural norms and belief systems prevent women from participating in higher education. For example, early marriage, or views that women shouldn't be in authority over men. So what I'm saying is not generally applicable, but overall the numbers of women faculty have also increased. In a number of countries, you see much more women on the faculty of universities and colleges. So in Europe, it's around 30% on average. In Finland, 40%, Turkey, 45%. One of the issues that people talk about is that when women dominate in the profession, sometimes the status of the profession goes down. And this is certainly the case in countries like Myanmar, where under the rule of the generals, women predominated in the universities, but the status of their positions was not significant. And then you look at what happens within the higher education system, and women are not making it to the top in large numbers. So they're not making it into the big research programs, and nor are they well represented in academic leadership. So if you just take the UK as an example, 1 in every 5 professors is a woman, and that's better than the figure in 1989 where it was 3%, but it's nowhere near parity. And although 42% of UK academic staff are women, only 17% reach the most senior research grades and professorships. In the US, women make up only 21% of science professors and only 5% of engineering professors. So you've got a real skewed picture with more women in the soft social sciences and fewer in the hard sciences. Across the board, whether in social or hard sciences, women fare poorly in awarding of research grants. So what we've seen in recent years is that the size of research grants get bigger, particularly from global funders, and huge status is derived from being able to command and then manage these big research grants. And women often are involved in the support of these, but are never or very rarely in the lead. And this hampers their career going forward. Now, if you look at the academic literature, there are 3 broad explanations for why women don't progress. The first is the gender division of labour. So women are seen in the academic context to be far more suited to teaching, and men to leadership and positions of authority. And we see in many areas where research has been done on this, that women get all the administrative jobs, they get big teaching loads, and they are rarely invited into the research space or management. Second explanation is gender bias, or what some people call affinity bias. So affinity bias is where you appoint or promote those people most like yourself, including into management. So if you have a management board of men and they are looking to expand or refresh their board, they look for people most like themselves, and they generally are other men. And the third area is the work-life balance issue, where women's career breaks to have children, their domestic and caring responsibilities make working in academia very much more difficult. They carry what has been called the double shift. And often those career breaks happen at a time when it's most crucial to continue or grow your academic career. So when men are just branching out and getting that big research grant, that's often when women are looking after their duties at home. But there are signs of progress. So if you look at some of the good things that are happening, many of the large international research projects often require women's participation and a gender focus in the research. So universities are beginning to say it's not okay to put forward an all-male research team. It's not okay to look at a research issue, for example, food security or water scarcity, and not look at the gender dimensions of those issues. To take some examples, the Indian government has a national task force which is addressing the issue of women in science, and this task force is mandated to address gender imbalances. In the UK, you have Athena Swan, which is a program which is designed to increase the participation of women in science. And then women scholars themselves in India have highlighted the need for strong mentorship, and working with the higher education media, of paying attention to this, putting the issue on the agenda, and engaging in mentorship programs. And if you look at the number of female professors in higher education institutions in India, which is the red line, compared to Bangladesh, Pakistan, and I think the other one is Nepal, what you see is a great degree of success. So I think some of these policy issues can work and can yield results. So that's looking at the issue of women in research. But what if we turn to the issue of women in leadership? And the picture is quite dismal globally. So in the UK, just a fifth of UK higher education institutions are headed by a woman vice-chancellor. And so 17% of the vice-chancellors in the UK are women. Now you compare that to the number of women who head FTSE 100 companies, and that's 10%. So it's better than the private sector, but not that much better. Now, if you look at the study that we commissioned on women in higher education leadership in South Asia, look at the difference between Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka and India. So Sri Lanka, off a very low base, has improved quite a lot. India goes up and down a bit. Pakistan has started to improve, but we're still looking at around 12% maximum. And indeed, some of those female executive heads are heads of all women colleges and universities. So we've got a very long way to go. One of the reasons for this are some of the blockages that I've described, gender bias and the work-life balance. So sometimes women exclude themselves from these positions. So there is a degree of reluctance to engage. And having been a woman higher education leader myself, I can understand that reluctance. I was the only woman on my university executive, and it was a difficult place to be. One of the reasons is, as I've already said, women often don't have the leadership background because they're not pulling in the big research grants. So they don't get the experience they need. And often when women are on higher education leadership teams, they are in very specific roles. So quoting from one piece of research, someone said, "I've sat in rooms with equal numbers of senior men and women and thought, oh, this is nice. But then find the women are head of library and head of student experience, and the men control the money, the buildings, and the research contracts." And in my case, I was responsible for the teaching and learning, but not for the research, which was always seen as as imbued with much more status. So these are some of the issues. What can we do about it? Policy. We need policy to mainstream gender, both in relation to students and in relation to staff with a focus on equity. We need data. Policy needs to be informed by gender disaggregated statistics that are regularly updated, and you would be surprised to know how many countries and institutions don't collect this data. And, you know, recognizing whether a person is a man or a woman is one of the easiest things to do in data collection, and yet it's not done. Recruitment and promotion policy. There needs to be an eye on how senior leaders are selected, and all processes need to be reviewed for transparency and accountability in decision making. Capacity building, which is at the heart of what INASP is doing, is absolutely important. So investing in women's research capacity and capability and their leadership potential. This is essential to include in continuing professional development, in mentoring, and in networks. And evidence is never far away from what we need. More is required to inform policies and practices for success. These are the recommendations for action that came out of the British Council's Going Global conference a couple of years ago, which focused on women in higher education. And I'm very pleased to have been able to share that with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jo. That was great. Just as a reminder to everybody who's any questions, please write them in the left-hand chat box at the bottom. What we will do is compile all of these questions, and at the end of the webinar, we have quite a lot of time for questions and answers, so we'll go through some of them then. So thank you very much, everybody. So I'm very happy to move on to our second speaker. Professor Fleur Fabian is the Director of Research Consultancy and Institutional Collaboration at the University of Dodoma in Tanzania. She specializes in biomedical sciences and has a PhD in heart tissue research. She is a trained facilitator and has a background in gender mainstreaming, and she is also currently leading the gender team at the University of Dodoma. So, welcome, Flora.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone. My topic today is challenges for women academics in Tanzania, and I will mainly take a case of Dodoma, but I will refer here and there to other higher institutions in Tanzania. So I will start by looking at what was in place before we actually started the gender mainstreaming process at Dodoma. And we noted that there is a deep-rooted gender roles in the society. And actually training starts right from childhood, and it doesn't end there. It goes through to the primary, secondary education, and definitely spills over to higher education. And at the University of Dodoma, we also noted that there were very few women in senior academic ranks. And when we were doing the initial workshop, actually, there was only one professor who is a Tanzanian and about 5 senior lecturers who were women at the time. And the picture is not very different from other higher education institutions. So we thought we had to start somewhere in the gender mainstreaming process, and we thought a workshop was a starting point. And in 2015, August, we started with a workshop that was titled Getting Out of the Box, Creating a Gender Platform at UDOM. And we thought Getting Out of the Box was the right title because women seemed to be in their own comfort zone and were not bothered by, making efforts to try and achieve higher academic ranks. This workshop was sponsored by INASP, and it was also co-facilitated by INASP as a starting point. During the workshop, it was learned that there was a negative mindset against women. This was from sharing both from local and our guests who were international participants. And therefore, it was recommended that we start gender mainstreaming process at UDO just to move on and have women acquiring higher academic ranks. And of course, this is a qualification to becoming leaders in higher ranks, such as deputy vice chancellors and the vice chancellor. So what was learned from this process, which we started as a workshop? Workshop participants gave their own personal experiences at the beginning, and through sharing, we noted that there were similarities between local and the international experiences. And it was also revealed that there was low confidence levels in women academics, and it seems it is not only in UDOM, but in higher learning academic institutions. Through discussions, we also learned that gender issues are actually sensitive and require small group work. And therefore, we started with the small groups, and we thought that women should participate in this first workshop so that at least we know actually how do they feel. So we had a group of 26 women from UDOM and 2 from institutions in Tanzania outside UDOM participating in that particular workshop, and it was mainly run through small group discussions and plenary sessions. And finally, at the end of the workshop, we had an action plan, which we actually decided that we are going to have a baseline study, and this baseline study will be conducted through focus group discussions to mainly identify the underlying factors. Why do we have so few women in higher academic ranks and, of course, in administrative positions? So I'm going to go through on what we found out through the focus group discussions. During the focus group discussions, we actually decided to have male discussants separately from the female groups so that we could have more openness in both. And what we found is that there was lack of understanding of the concept of gender. Generally, people were just mixing between gender and sex. And the second important finding was that prevalence of gender issues at UDOM was there. There was a prevalent issue of gender actually and sexual harassment, but these were silent, and they were not discussed, they were not reported anywhere. And this was reported by both male and the female groups. And also, it was noted that there is male were dominating in both management and academic positions, but also in student enrollment. Yeah, the third issue that we found is that there are issues of belittling, discrediting, and bullying women in the institution. And this was reported also by both male and female groups in both administrative and academic staff. And it was also reported that females are seen as second-class citizens even when they are capable of doing things. It would be seen as if they have been given the positions just because they were women and they were getting favor, actually. We also noted that there was skewed representation in some fields at the University of Dodoma. And this actually applies to other higher learning institutions. We learned from the facilitators who were coming outside UDOM. And in some colleges, for example, the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, you have more girls than boys. And in colleges such as the College of Health Sciences, we have like almost equal. But in other colleges like Natural and Mathematical Sciences, ICT, that is informatic and virtual education, in engineering, petroleum, gas, in all those we found that there were more males because it seems that males would go to the hard sciences rather than females. One thing we noted, actually both in the workshop and during the focus group discussions, is that women has multiple roles, and they also have special needs, which kind of were not being addressed, or the women themselves were not aware of. And in higher learning institutions, and UDOM in particular, the situation is not different. And therefore, women, they will be mothers, they will be a wife, they will be a relative, taking care of everyone. At the same time, they have to be a professor or a senior lecturer, and they may be a PhD student or a master's student, but they have to carry all these roles. And unfortunately, without any gender sensitization, they will feel as if everything is okay, business as usual. I'm a good mother, I'm a good wife, I can take care of my family, I can take care of my husband, and so forth and so forth. So we thought, really, we have a place where we started, and the starting was good. We also found out that there is what we call gendered sympathy seeking from students and, of course, from junior staff. And it is clearly shown that you are a professor, but people look at you as a mother. People look at you as a sister, so that you can actually sympathize with their problems, and it is easier for you to actually help them rather than a male professor. So a professor will be, a male professor is called a professor, and a female professor is mom. So this actually was observed normally, but it came out very strongly during the workshop and during the focus group discussions. And since when we were doing the focus group discussions, we also involved the issues of sexual harassment. And the finding indicated that there is a muddled conception of sexual harassment. Basically, people could not, separate harassment versus consented relationships. And culturally, people may comment things which they feel is just okay because you are a woman, and they don't feel there was any problem with it. But female discussant actually thought it was a problem having to be given inappropriate comments. And the second thing was conspiracy and revenge. And this was given by students, but also by the lecturers, that some students may actually conspire against a teacher or another student, especially when there is a failing relationship and things like that. And when they fail, they will come actually to the dean also and start complaining, this and this happened, which could be false. Also, the sexual harassment issues tend to create hostile learning, teaching learning environment. And actually, it may affect, many students reported that it affects performance during their process of learning at the university, mainly because if issues have been there between a lecturer and a student, the student may be jeopardized and maltreated and things like that. And it is both ways. When a student has refused a relationship from a lecturer, it can also happen. It was also reported that there is exploitation, deception, and intimidation. And actually, we know that we both, male and female, has rights, but having the right was not enough. But sometimes that right is not considered, and one has to go extra mile to buy the right sexually, especially with administrative staff. They can be used very easily. and in management also. So from the gender focus group discussions, we have developed a gender and sexual harassment policy, and this policy is in its final stage. Actually, it's being discussed tomorrow in our Senate, and we hope that it's going to be approved at the University Council. And once that is approved, we plan to start gender sensitization at the University of Dodoma, and it's going to include both management and colleges and schools, and therefore finally it's going to involve everyone. Of course, the gender mainstream workshop mainly involved women, because we thought we had to have a few women who will have confidence to start doing things. But the process of gender mainstreaming is going to include both men and women. And of course, it was an advantage that we are working with a northern partner, because this has actually hastened the process and influenced the acceptance. But we also did a good networking with management and the middle level administration. And because we have been working with INASP as well in the research, writing, embedding activities, it's become easier. So it has been accepted, and management is looking forward for this policy to start working. And in the policy, we have suggested that we have a gender unity, which is central, and at college level, we are going to have gender desks. So we are hoping that things are going to work positively for sure. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
That's great. Thank you so much, Flora. That's incredibly interesting. It looks like we have quite a lot of questions and comments coming through, which is great. So as I mentioned earlier, we will be collating these. And after our final presentation by Sarah, we will start to go through some of the common questions that have come through. So I'm very happy now to introduce our next speaker. So Sarah Alman-Koshin is the Deputy Executive Director and Programs Manager at CEDRA Institute. So that's the Somali Institute for Development and Research Analysis in Puntland in Somalia. She is a Somali-Dutch development practitioner, professional work experience in institutional strengthening, gender mainstreaming, and women's empowerment in Somalia, Kenya, the Netherlands, Sierra Leone, Zambia, Sudan, and Thailand. So welcome.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you very much, Jennifer. I hope you can hear me. I kind of lost you a while back, but I could hear you loud and clear just now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Good. Thank you very much. I would like to also thank the previous speakers for the wonderful presentations they made. I learned a great deal from them. A very good afternoon to all the listeners. My name is Sahro, as I introduced earlier. I'm actually participating in the webinar all the way from Garowe, the capital city of Puntland. It's wonderful to be so connected while we're so far away from each other. It's actually my first time to participate in a webinar. I think it's fantastic. I'm very happy to present to you this presentation, which essentially actually gives a very good picture of what we were able to accomplish the past year with the support of INASP. So even though I am speaking very broadly about the Somali context, I am specifically focusing on a best practice from Puntland. My presentation will consist of the following. I'll give you, to begin with, a general outline of what the main goal is of the presentation. I will then speak about give you some background information about the project we conducted.
Hi, Sarah.
I will then talk about the sort of, you know, historical background to higher education in Somalia. I will then speak about the challenges women are facing, in particular in research in higher education in Somalia. And then I will share with you the knowledge exchange, the best practice we did with INASP last year in November. And I will conclude with some recommendations. So the objective of my presentation is to share with you some of the major barriers women are facing in research and in higher education, but also some of the opportunities that are out there based on our experiences. Some of you might be actually familiar with the situation in Somalia. We've had a civil war that started way back in 1991. And we've had a complete absence of rule of law, and the education sector was actually privatized, and it was in the hands of private organizations, private institutions. The last study that was done on higher education in Somalia was way back in 2013 by the Heritage Institute based in Mogadishu, which concluded that there were actually 50 higher education institutions in Somalia with a student population of about 50,000 students. As I said earlier, because of the subsequent insecurity and very weak central government, that actually led to the privatization of the higher education sector. 86% of the higher education institutions surveyed in that research actually complained about low capacity of teaching and administrative staff. And in the case of Puntland, where I am based and which my presentation will be based on, actually it has 14 higher education institutions, 11 universities, one teacher training college based in Garowe, and one veterinary veterinary college. The student population is roughly about 11,500. Some of the major, challenges that we are facing here in Puntland have to do with the situation of the higher education institutions, what they are offering, the quality of the teaching, but also the level of learning on the student side. So there's hardly any information there, let alone on women researchers. In terms of, let me just get that back there. Yes, this one. So what happened was we actually did a. If you just excuse me a minute there, because I'm actually using my phone. It's a bit of a challenge touching the screen. Okay, so we, with the support of INASP, we actually conducted a study last year. Yeah, this is the slide that I wanted to have. We actually, how it all began was there was a grant that was announced actually by AuthorAid, and Sierra had applied to that call, and we won the call. That's how it all started, actually, the collaboration we had, and led to the best practice in Puntland. So when we won this award with AuthorAid, we conducted a training for higher education students from mainly from the universities here in Garowe and surrounding towns. And we realized that of the 50 applicants, only 7 were female, and of the 30 that eventually did participate in the training, only 5 were female. And then there was also another project we had done with the Vrije Universiteit, the Open University in Amsterdam, with the Ministry of Education in Puntland. And in that training, there were 22 university lecturers whom we were training as CIDRA on how to conduct research in order for them to develop, research departments in their universities. And the only one was female of the 22 university lecturers who we trained. So that was another alarming, reason why we wanted to focus on gender in higher education, in particular on women and their capacities in higher education. And this actually led to the partnership that we had with INASP, a project focusing on gender in higher education, which consisted of research, a knowledge exchange forum, training, documentation, and I would like to speak about that right now. So what we did to begin with was a major study. We wanted to do a mapping of what are actually the challenges women are facing in research and higher education. Now, I have worked with the Ministry of Education prior to joining CIDRA, and I worked there as a senior technical advisor on gender issues. And I can share with you some of the challenges that women and girls are facing in accessing quality education. To begin with, there's a very high dropout rate in the secondary schools. So there are few girls going to primary schools and even fewer girls who are going to secondary schools. And then, of course, you expect a very small number of women who actually are in university because of the fact that they dropped out in secondary school. So we wanted to understand why women dropping out, why are there very few women in research or in higher education, in education institutions in Puntland. And these are what we found, which we grouped into three major categories. To begin with, socioeconomic and cultural factors. There is a negative perception towards women. Women are seen to be to behave soft and to be emotional, and because you're, as Professor Fabian was saying earlier, you have a gender role in society and you're expected to live towards that role. It's very, very rare to find a woman in, a head of school teacher in Puntland. There are actually no school heads in secondary schools. You will find that some primary schools are actually being managed by females, but in secondary schools, there are none, and there are very few female lecturers in universities. So another cultural challenge is that, the family prefers the boy or the girl, and in situations where a family has to decide who goes to school, the preference will be for the boy, because the boy is expected to later on grow up to be a man and to be a provider for his family. So there is that investment in the male child over the female child. Another problem we faced and here in Puntland is that girls are opting for an early marriage because of the problems they are facing in secondary schools. There's issues around puberty. There's issues of of sexual stigma and sexual violence towards young girls, and many young girls will actually drop out from secondary schools. Another challenge we saw is that there is lack of gender sensitivity towards the needs of the girl child in secondary schools, where actually, which is actually the most important stepping stone for women to progress to higher education, because the school does not have for example, we had a case where we did a survey on young girls and why they were dropping out way back when I was with the ministry. And girls would say, when I'm menstruating, I would want to stay away from school because I am afraid of leaking, so I don't want to be shamed, but and I might get my period while I'm in class, and the school does not provide, for the needs of the girl child. There is absolutely no presence of female lecturers or female teachers. The only women you would see in the schools are the cleaners, actually. So you would find that girls actually 7 days, 5 days a month would stay at home because of that basic, right to have access to sanitary towels. Another reason girls actually drop was that they know that they would eventually get married, and they will be expected to be at home, because a good mother is the mother who stays at home. There is a general attitude towards women who are in research. When I was, for example, there was a time I was doing research in Puntland in the field, and when I was collecting data, I was actually told, where's your husband? Why are you traveling alone? Because the research area, it seemed to be something for men, somebody who investigates, who collects data, and women don't do that, are not supposed to be doing that. So you're not a good woman, you're not a good mother. Because of the war and the general, insecurity that followed, you would find that women are very afraid to walk great distances to higher education and learning centers. That was also mentioned as a challenge. In Puntland, we have some policies, and we have a gender in higher education policy, but it's not been implemented. There is no priority to promote research or to promote women's participation in research. There is also a limited number of scholarships. Oftentimes we find online that there is some kind of opportunity being offered somewhere in the world, but because many issues, Somali women do not have access to that. Sometimes it's only for the Commonwealth countries. Sometimes because of the passport issue, the Somali passport not being valued, enough. So there's a lot of competition that makes women who do want to take part in research, who do want to get exposed to the international community, to take part in the publications of their papers and their work. But there are no scholarships either from the government or from elsewhere to promote women to do research and to actually produce their work and publish their work. There is also a lack of infrastructure in general in Puntland, in terms of that we don't have a statistical bureau, we don't have a scientific database, which should and could facilitate research work. Another challenge, a group of challenges that women faced, had to do with institutional factors. In the forum that I will talk about later on, where we gathered all this data, we had female lecturers who actually came and spoke about their personal experiences, about how the challenges they faced actually, and this is not just unique to these women. This happens, in fact, all over Somalia. That when women actually get pregnant, they actually are not paid for the maternity leave. In the survey we did with the Ministry of Education way back in 2014, before I joined CIDRA, when we asked the institutions and the secondary school management staff why they were not hiring female lecturers, they gave as a reason women get pregnant and they leave, and then they go for breastfeeding hours, and then they get pregnant again. I mean, that was seen to be women, when they went on maternity leave, were actually paid. There was a replacement. There was a policy that said that, okay, when a woman, she has the right to maternity leave, a paid maternity leave, and but then there will be a replacement for the period of time that she's away. That is completely absent today in Somalia, and this has implications for the female lecturers. There is also a lack of gender sensitivity in the physical environment of the universities we went to do the research with. We have seen that, for example, there are no meeting rooms for women, there are no toilets, separate toilets for women, there are no prayer spaces for women, and there was a complete absence of the women's presence in that institution, a total disregard for them. There's also a general understanding, as Professor Fabian also said in the case of Tanzania, that people actually don't understand, what gender means, and how to find actually a good job. So this is actually the main project that I am presenting in this presentation. We had implemented this project with the support of INASP. There was a 3-day event where we focused on women in higher education in Puntland. What are the problems? How many are they? What are the issues they are facing? What could be potential, opportunities and avenues for solutions? Who are the stakeholders? We had divided the groups into 3 groups. So there were workshops. There was a workshop on research, women in research. What are the challenges they are facing? What are the opportunities that they mentioned? Women in higher education was another subgroup that we had, and then women and skill building. What skills do women require to overcome some of these major challenges? We had a very strong presence and participation of the government. We had the Minister of Education, we had the Minister of Women Affairs and Family Development, who came and spoke about, the very important topic we are tackling actually. And so that was a 3-day forum. It was very, very important. And it led to an exploration of gender issues and gaps that are affecting women in research. We had a call for papers whereby about 16 papers were submitted by 16 women, covering topics ranging from disability in higher education, the role of female lecturers, and what the problems are they are facing in secondary schools, in also universities. We had a coverage of many of how women actually and had challenges in their lives and how they overcame those problems. So this sorry we had after this call for papers, we had the research, and then we had a policy brief which is online. You can find it on our website at sidrainstitute.org. A policy brief which is the first of its kind, covering gender in higher education in Puntland. The findings of this research, we will disseminate them shortly in a forum that we are organizing for stakeholders, for the government, local and international organizations, and for the right stakeholders, the people who are involved in making policy. So with this report, we are presenting some of the major findings that we that are actually based on the research on the forum, and the document is being translated currently into Somali so that the Somali community can actually understand and find it more useful. Another component to this project was a short video documentary of the project from start to end. It covered also the forum itself, the 3-day forum, and it interviewed some of the women who actually came there, including the female lecturers. We also developed a community of practice, a network, a mailing list specific for female academics, students, researchers. This was a need that came out of the forum, whereby women said, we need a place where we can communicate amongst ourselves, where we can ask questions and get answers, and also kind of be mentored by elder, women who have been successful in the research and higher education. So this community of practice will be launched when we are doing the forum, actually, time in early August. There was also a training for women who showed a great interest in how to write, a good academic paper. How do you write a good scientific paper, and how do you actually publish it? So after this forum, we actually had this 2-day training whereby 18 people participated, 18 women participated, and they were given tools and knowledge, skills, and how to actually write a very good paper. And some of them actually did that. I know that at least 2 of them were able to publish their work, and their work is actually in English online, where you can also actually have access to. The recommendations and the way forward. In the gender policy brief, we are actually giving recommendations to the right, people, to the institutions of higher learning and research. We are recommending that they create a supportive and gender-sensitive environment for female students and staff members, and that they ratify and implement action plans and policies. As I said earlier, policies are in place, but they are not being used, they're not being utilized. For the government, we are recommending that they monitor gender mainstreaming targets at all levels of education system consistently. We had the participation of the Ministry of Women Affairs, and actually we were speaking about the fact that there is a gender in policy in Puntland, but there's also gender in higher education policy, and the two should actually complement each other. To the government, we also recommended that they establish a gender-responsive budget strategy for capacity building in leadership and research. In other words, that they actually provide scholarships and grants for women to be able to do research. Some of the civil society organizations, we are recommending that they create a network for women to support each other in education and research. And, for example, the community of practice we are doing with INASP, and that they arrange events such as career affairs. Now, women gave a strong, need, or demonstrated a strong need for role modeling, for mentoring, and for having a career fair. Women, it's very hard to choose what to study, and there's no perspective in place because you just don't know what to study or what you will aspire to be or what you can be after studying a particular profession. There's a lot of a lack of information, and in the forum that we had, some of the questions the young girls were asking the elder women was, how did you come this far? What support did you get? You can see that women actually are interested, but they just don't have access to information or don't have a clear picture of the possibilities out there. The other thing that I actually am basing on my own experience is that we are what we are today because of bringing, and it's very important. If you want to have an impact in society, and if you want to bring about change begins at home. They have said that charity begins at home, and if you want to tackle a very complicated topic, like, it's very important that the Ministry of Women Affairs and the right people should actually incorporate into the curriculum at a very young age, for example, even in kindergarten and in early childhood learning, about respect for girls and boys, and also about gender roles, and about having girls and boys have access to the same rights. So this was actually my presentation, and these are some of the references that I used, which you can use, by the way. Finally, our gender policy online, and there is the link to our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saro. I think we've had a lot of comments and a lot of questions throughout all of our various presentations. So I'm now happy to sort of start the question and answer portion. We have about 20 minutes. We have had a few questions that come through, so we've been looking on the left-hand side, and just as a reminder, if you do want to ask a question, please do post it in the chat box on the left-hand side. Some of the questions that we've seen have been about sort of, we've been talking about this for a really long time, so why do we think it's so slow? Another question is, why do we still have the leaky pipeline despite available initiatives to build capacity for women researchers? I think those two might be best addressed at Jo Beale, if she's happy to answer them, because really it seems they are sort of questions at sort of addressed at the UK, where we've been talking about these questions or these issues for quite a long time. So Jo, are you happy to take that question? So the first one is, yeah, go ahead.
I'll answer the question with an anecdote. My elderly mother put a hygiene message on the London Underground, which said, you can pick up germs from the handrails, please wash your hands. And she said to me, I can't understand why they've got that up there. 40 years ago, they had those messages, so we know them. And I said to her, but Mum, there have been people born since you first saw those messages 40 years ago, and we have to keep on. And I think it's the same with all gender issues. It's very slow when you need to change cultural relations, and most particularly gender relations. It's even slower when it is about issues of power. And new generations coming along who are younger than us need to be informed and appraised of both the journey we've been on, but the challenges still ahead. So sometimes you think you're knocking your head against a brick wall saying, we've been saying this for so long, why is nothing changing? But we just have to keep on. And as the presentations that you heard today from Tanzania and Somalia suggest, there is a lot of new learning if we go down into the detail, if we go into the granularity of what's going on. We learn more about what's getting in the way of women's progress, and more about what we can do about it at different levels. So I think the big challenge is for a community of practice or interest around this issue to decide on how we connect the interventions we make at different levels, from at the very local level tackling sexual harassment, and at a policy level ensuring ministers are aware and concerned about these issues, and even at a global level to keep these issues on the policy agenda.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. There actually have been a few other questions about, sort of connecting women in research with other women. So there was one question around if there's nobody in your institution. The question was, how can mentoring be improved, especially when you join a faculty where there are no senior women available to take these roles? And I think, from INASP and AuthorAid's point of view, we really encourage people to use online networks, and Saro talked about that quite a lot. And creating a community of practice, I think, is really important, because even if you don't have somebody in your department, or even in your college, you can connect with other women through these communities, online communities, through the AuthorAid mentoring program, which anybody can sign up to it and look for a mentor. Saro, did you want to talk a little bit about your community of practice and how you've used it so far? I know it's quite new.
Are you addressing that to me, Jennifer?
Sorry, I addressed that to Saro.
Okay, good.
Thank you for that. You wanted me to speak a bit more about the community of practice, right?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that. I think one of the best ways that people can learn, especially women, is to meet women who have been successful in that particular area, whatever it be, economics, politics, education, and generally young women are in need of, a role model figure, somebody who can tutor them, mentor them and mold them into becoming, what they aspire to be in life. And in particular, in a culture like Somalia, in our Somali culture, women are very shy. Young girls are very shy to seek help from male figures. So when they do see a very successful woman, they actually seek. We actually only
Sorry,
have
Saro.
one. And
Sorry, we just lost you for a minute. If you just could repeat the last thing you said, please.
yes, what I was saying is that the community of practice can be a platform for women, young women who are coming up the ladder, to get support and to be tutored by women who are more successful in life. And in the Somali culture, where young girls don't have access to information, are very shy to seek support from male figures who actually dominate the academia right now. They actually showed a great need and interest in having a place where they can easily ask themselves questions. So this community of practice, we're actually developing it and going to launch it soon with the support of INASP. It is more like author aid, where it will only be accessible to Somali women who can also ask questions in Somali. This is one of the advantage, actually. We are also learning a lot from actually this process as we get support and at being tutored ourselves by Ruth, for example, Ruth Bottomley, and by Andy, from Author Aid and INASP, and to whom we are very thankful. But it's an online platform where you can become a member and where you can pose your questions and you get support and actually an answer from women who we have identified to be in the right position to do so. There's also going to be a sharing of resources. Sometimes we get information, even from author aid, that is very useful for women researchers. It can be a training, it can be funding, or it can be the opportunity to go to another country to actually follow a training or a workshop, but also on how to publish. There is a lot of information and a lot of resources and tools that are being shared that are online, especially on author aid, and we want to make that accessible to the women here in Somalia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've found, more generally, for a community of practice is really just a formal term to talk about a way to talk to a group of women. So some of our partners are just using a WhatsApp group, and that's for them an important way of easily talking to a group of their peers, of women who they might have met through workshops, who are working in different departments, who they don't see every day. And there's also, of course, like you said, the author aid online mentoring system and the discussion group. And we're hoping to expand the discussion group in the future and have more forums. And one of those could be specifically for women who want to talk to each other. So there's an interesting comment on the left-hand side about transformational change, and it says, for transformational change to be realized, I think there is a need to also include men and agents of change, as they are the gatekeepers of the social cultural norms, which is a great barrier. But then how do we engage these men to ensure harmony in families and communities? And we did have another question earlier about that, which was about how we can engage men in this work, particularly getting them involved in some of these deeper issues. So I think I might Flora, do you have any thoughts?
I think yes, I would try with this. If you remember what I said when we were starting the gender mainstreaming, we actually started with a workshop where we included only females because of the low confidence in females. But our aim actually is to include both female and males in this important gender mainstreaming process. And therefore, actually, after our policy is passed, we are going to have both male and female included in the gender mainstreaming. But we know the first thing is to have a clear understanding between gender and sex. Because in our case, we actually found out that there is a big confusion between what gender is and what is actually the biological sex is. And therefore, I think it is important for initially all of us to be on the same page. And actually, it will be an inspiration if we have both men and women doing the work together, as long as we are on the same page.
Thank you.
Jennifer, can I come in here?
Yes, absolutely.
So there's an interesting UN-led program called He for She, and they have taken a number of key areas, business and so on, to look at where men can advocate on behalf of women. And one is universities. Now, it's very controversial. So, some people think it's patronizing, and other people think it's very useful. But I'll just read you very briefly what the Vice Chancellor of the University of Leicester says. I am the President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Leicester, and I am a man. This is no great surprise, given that the overwhelming majority of higher education institutions are led by men. And he goes on about gender imbalance, and then he says, so I am proud of the fact that the University of Leicester has been selected to take a leading role in the UN Women He for She campaign, which emphasizes the important role men can play in achieving gender equality for women, an agenda that has been left to women for far too long. So I just put that there for debate, because some women find that patronizing, and others say if men don't get involved, then we'll never change.
Do you have any thoughts, Fleur, about that?
Actually, I just mentioned it. I said when we have men on board, it can be quite inspirational, actually. We don't feel like it is patronizing in our case, because even during the baseline study, some of those questions were asked, and our answer is clearly men should come aboard. But we need to be on the same page as regarding the gender. If you are talking to a community that understands clearly what gender is, then we could, have them right away on board. But we feel we need the basics. We need to be sure that we are on the same level when it comes to gender. And for sure, this will be very good, because it is felt. When we say gender, in the past, our society will think gender is a woman. Simply that, gender is about women. But currently, people, are changing, and we are understanding gender is for both. Because even for men, they have their own genderized issues. Like a man is not supposed to cry when someone dies. And they may not cry at the time, but psychologically it stays over and over, and it affects their life. So gender is gender for both, and it is very important that men are taken on board.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, one of the organizations that INASP has worked closely with in the past is the Organization for Women in Science and Development. We co-hosted a workshop with them in Sudan earlier this year. And they've actually opened up membership to men, but only as long as they support the women in the network. So, it remains to be seen what exactly they mean by support, but I think there is a way to engage without it being a patronizing task. I suppose, Saro, if you had any thoughts on this, that'd be quite helpful.
Thank you. Actually, we have a lot to learn from other people here in Somalia, where everything is really pretty much we are beginning from scratch. I mean, I have seen the program that Dr. Joe Bell was talking about earlier, for he, for she, and I have actually tweeted or retweeted several tweets that they have posted on Twitter. I think it's very important to include men in addressing any inequality in society, because you cannot advance women's agenda without the support and full participation of women. Let me give you an example from Somalia. We have a problem around FGM, female genital mutilation, which is a very bad practice that is done onto young girls at a very young age. There are various types. The most severe type is also practiced here, which is called the pharaonic infibulation, whereby I don't want to go into details, but really it has been very disastrous for women during childbirth, and there's been many medical, psychosocial problems around this practice, this cultural practice. it has been with the support of men that it has been almost eradicated in Somalia, especially religious men, because until recently, people were convinced that FGM is a religious duty. And but it was only when imams in mosques started talking about this in during prayer and said, "This is wrong. You are not supposed to do this. If you do it, you will have a lot to answer to God." You know that women actually stopped doing it. Now this practice is done onto women by other women. It is a women's job. There is no men involved at all in this practice. In when it's done, how it's done, who does it, it's entirely a woman's job. But it's because of the men who came forward and spread this word that we have now a decrease in the severe type of FGM in Somalia. And in politics also, recently Somalia has gone through a tremendous political transformation whereby women have been given a significant position, a significant quota in becoming ministers, vice ministers, director generals, and so forth. This has been possible because of our president, of course, but because of gender champions who have been championing for women's participation in politics. I think it's very important to have women and men together in any fight in addressing any inequality in society.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting point, and I think we struggle with it at INASP as well when we're starting gender mainstreaming processes with new partners, as we often get told that, why is the first workshop for women only? And this is something that we struggle with. We don't always know how to answer that question, but what we think is that it's really important to include men in the process, but that there does always have to be a way that women can talk to each other alone and in their own group. So we think that that's a very important part of that general process. And we only have 2 minutes left, so I think I'll just finish off with one question for all three of our panelists and our speakers. And this is one of the questions that came up earlier in the chat, and it essentially said, how can we ensure that 5 years from now we are not having the same conversation? So Joe, I wonder if you're happy to start. Not an easy question to answer, I think.
So unfortunately, I think in 5 years' time we will still be having the same conversation, but the numbers, the percentages, the practices will incrementally have improved. So I think we're in for the long haul and the hard slog here. But I think in 5 years' time, if the number of women vice chancellors has increased, the number of women in academic staff has improved, there are more women written in as PIs on big research grants and so on, then we will have not wasted our time over the 5 years. But I don't think we will get there and complete the mission in that time. So keep on keeping on, as I would say.
Absolutely. And Flora?
Just chip in there. I think we may or we may not. As we are now, we are talking of women academics balancing the baskets, balancing their home activities and their research activities, and this will increase their research publications, because normally in our case, fortunately, women as well as men can actually develop proposals. They can, so we can, if we have actually realized that something needs to be done, and we will get into higher academic ranks, and therefore possibility of having more higher ranking academic leaders as women.
Thank you. And Sarah?
I also want to, end up with a more positive note. I think the future is bright for women. I think there's a lot we can learn from each other. We are very happy here in Somalia to be connected to women in Tanzania and women elsewhere in the world who have, fought up the ladder and are actually addressing issues successfully, transforming society. I'm very happy to actually hear Professor Fabian, whom whose work I have actually read about on the blog of INASP. I think it's very important for African women to be connected, to learn and link to link and learn from each other. I think that we have a lot to showcase here, and I think the future is bright for African women, in particular in Africa and in particular in Somalia.
Great. Absolutely. And on that note, I think we can formally end this webinar. So I just want to express a very sincere and heartfelt thanks to all three of our speakers who made the time today to join the webinar and to prepare their presentations. So many thanks to everybody. I'm really hoping this won't be the end of the conversation. And I think at INASP, we're thinking about ways that we can continue this conversation. And like I said, we'd really like to create a forum later in the year that would be an opportunity for women to talk to each other about these issues. And just a last note that we're hoping that all of our speakers will be happy to share their slides with everybody. So once we get the go-ahead, we will forward those to everyone. Like I mentioned earlier, this has been recorded as well, and we will send around a link to the recording either today or tomorrow when we've finalized it. You'll also receive an email follow-up with some of the documents that we've discussed today and some of the links, including the policy paper that Saro spoke about for CEDRA. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a very great rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.